These were times of misfortune. A committee of active royalists was organized and carried hopes to Louis XVIII. At the end of 1813, our borders had been forced by the passage. The Swiss opened for the armies of the coalition. Our allies were abandoning us. Before leaving Paris, the emperor returned Ferdinand VII to Spain and the Pope to Rome. He entrusted the Empress and the King of Rome to the fidelity of the Parisian National Guard. The enthusiasm generated by the emperor when he took the young king in his arms to present him to the National Guard officers gathered together in the Hall of Marshals can never be forgotten by its witnesses. Frenetic and prolonged cries of "Vive l'Empereur" moved from the Hall of Marshals to the assembled National Guard in the carousel. When the emperor passed in front of them to receive their oath of loyalty, the air was filled with a roll of cries of "Vive l'Empereur!" "Long live the Empress! Long live the King of Rome!" These demonstrations of so true a love for his son moved the emperor. He kissed the young prince with a warmth that escaped none in the audience and moistened more than one eye. Each day, the emperor followed the progress of France's enemies on his map. There was much concern among the wealthy classes, but for the common people, the emperor was there. Faith in his genius was great, and a clever scheme could revive his star, obscured by two campaigns that were unfortunate but not devoid of glory for our armies. In vain, they were negotiating in Châtillon-sur-Seine. The emperor recognized in St. Helena that it was not possible for the negotiators to make peace there, so they fought. And the 1814 campaign was one of the more glorious for our troops and the emperor, but not the most successful. The emperor made war with 40,000 men against 240,000 and defeated them. He said he would have driven them from Paris, but for the treason of Marmont, Augereau, and Talleyrand. He therefore made war until the moment when the new Judas surrendered his master, and treason took away Paris and a part of the army from France. The emperor was quartered in Troyes at the home of Baron de Mesquigny, one of his equerries, when he learned during the night by a coded note that the enemy army was approaching Paris. He went the following day, escorted by the service squadrons, as far as Villeneuve-l'Archevêque, and arrived in great haste at midnight on the 30th at Cour-de-France to learn of the enemy's entry into Paris through a surrender and the retreat of the government and the Empress to Blois. Napoleon returned to Fontainebleau, where his guards soon joined him, and they asked to march upon Paris and punish the traitors whose names were known to them. The emperor was going to head them towards Pithiviers and Orleans. Once reunited with the government and the empress, he would be able to parlay when someone came to announce there was a hope of negotiation. The emperor thus remained at Fontainebleau, and in this fashion lost his wife, his son, his treasure, the muscle of his power, and a very strong barrier. On April 2nd, the act of forfeiture was pronounced by the Senate. The emperor learned about it in Fontainebleau, where he was surrounded by his guard, his marshals, and the senior officers of his household. His great heart must have breathed vengeance against this cowardly decision by the first body of state. Sinister rumors even circulated about His Majesty's life being threatened by men who, it was said, owed him their high positions. The emperor must have then felt great contempt for the human race, and in particular for those who, forgetting the respect they owed him, could be annihilated by a single call to his guard, who were totally devoted to him. The crisis had reached its peak and could not last any longer. The marshals invited the emperor to abdicate in favor of his son. He therefore sent a few of them, along with the Duke of Vicenza, Caulaincourt, to negotiate advantageous conditions for the King of Rome with the Emperor of Russia, in the name of the army, telling them to take with Marmont, in whom he placed great faith. These gentlemen departed once in Essonne. They informed the Duke of Ragusa, Marmont, of the emperor's desire to have him join them. The marshal appeared embarrassed and unsure of what he should do, then finally decided to get in the carriage with them. Once in Paris, they went to Emperor Alexander's residence and were strangely surprised not to see Marmont accompany them. They were not aware that an agreement had been made between him and Prince Schwarzenberg, which no longer allowed him to defend the emperor's interests. They nevertheless obtained the regency. The Emperor of Russia had appeared favorably disposed towards Napoleon II when an officer handed him a dispatch telling him that the Duke of Ragusa Marmont's corps had withdrawn to Versailles, leaving Napoleon's headquarters at Fontainebleau unprotected. Given that the plenipotentiaries had come to negotiate with him in the name of the army, he was amazed to learn through this dispatch that the officers of that corps supported the act of forfeiture proclaimed by the Senate. The negotiators themselves, taken aback by such inconceivable news, tried to mitigate the bad impression this dispatch had just made on the Emperor Alexander. But nothing more could change his mind, and the meeting had to break up. The marshals returned to Fontainebleau and told the emperor how Emperor Alexander's good intentions had suddenly altered when he learned of the defection of Marmont's corps and of their useless efforts to convince the prince that the treason of a commander and a few generals did not represent the devoted feelings of that corps toward the emperor. But the monarch had no longer wanted to hear anything. The thought of being abandoned by a man whose fortune he had made, with whom he had shared his bread, upon whom he thought he could rely, was very painful to him, and must remain a tragic remorse in the heart of the man guilty of it, since that defection prevented the army from imposing its conditions, and the House of Bourbons was recalled to the throne.